Hello, webinar attendees. My name is Marisol Morales, and I serve as the Vice President for Network Leadership with Campus Compact. We're so happy to have you be part of our second year of our Campus Compact National Webinar Series. Today's webinar is titled, Let's Play, Votes and Ballots, Creating Quality Action Plans for Democratic Engagement Through Gamification. So we are so lucky to have our wonderful and talented presenters who I will be introducing shortly. But first, I just want to plug a few of the Campus Compact activities and events. First, encourage you to check out our bi-weekly podcast series called Compact Nation. It's co-hosted by the president of Campus Compact, Andrew Seligson, the director of Iowa and Minnesota Campus Compact, Emily Shields, and myself, and you can check that out on any podcast app that you enjoy. The second thing is our national conference, which will be in Seattle, March 29th through April 1st. The title of the conference is Full Participation, the Promise of Democracy, Opportunity, and Voice. And we're really excited about this upcoming year's conference, where we'll also be showcasing our first annual Impact Awards. We have 3 new awards that we'll be sharing: the Nadine Cruz Community Engagement Professional Award, the Richard Garassi Award for 4-year institution, and the Eduardo Pedron Award for community colleges. So please check out our website. The nominations for those awards are due January 7th. And then also our Newman Civic Fellows nominations are open, so please check that out. You have to be a Campus Compact member in order to nominate a student to be a Newman Civic Fellow. With that, I will introduce our presenters. Our first presenter is Emily Giffin, who is the Campus Partnerships Manager at Democracy Works. Democracy Works is made by TurboVote. And Emily supports college campuses across the country in their work to increase civic learning and democratic engagement among student voters, with a particular focus on leveraging technology. In addition to supporting partners' strategic use of TurboVote, Emily travels to conferences in order to facilitate votes and ballots, which we'll be learning about today, an action planning activity developed by Democracy Works that takes the guesswork out of on-campus democratic engagement. She graduated from the University of Missouri with a Bachelor's of Journalism degree, and before joining Democracy Works was part of the EdTech team at Scholastic, and Emily is based in Chicago. Welcome, Emily. Next, we have Allison Rank. Allison is Assistant Professor of Political Science at Oswego State University of New York. Dr. Rank teaches courses in American politics with a focus on American political history, political communication, race, and gender. In addition to traditional political science courses, she serves as the campaign manager for the campus-wide voter mobilization program, Vote Oswego. In this capacity, she oversees an internship program and runs a politics practicum course focused on grassroots organizing. Her research agenda focuses on the role of youth in American politics, civic engagement, and political science pedagogy. Her work has appeared in New Political Science, PS, Political Science and Politics, Journal of Political Science Education, and Citizenship Studies. So welcome to our presenters. We're really excited to have you present democratic engagement through gamification, especially during this time. So welcome and get started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can you hear me, Allison? You're the only one I can see, so wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to the Campus Compact team for having us as part of this year's national webinar series. We are really thrilled to share our work with you all today, and that work is an exciting and evolving activity called Votes and Ballots. I want to say first, feel free to use the Q&A function and or the chat box to submit questions. It could be that we won't get to them till the end, but we'll make sure we're keeping an eye on that as best as we can. But there will be time for questions at the end. So let's get started. Great. So for a quick overview of our agenda, we'll begin with introductions. Then we'll talk briefly about action planning in general, what it is, and why it's important. Next, I will share about the original version of Votes and Ballots that was created in 2018 and its primary purpose. Before I hand the mic over to Allison to talk about her team's development of Votes and Ballots Curricular Edition and how it differs and expands upon the original activity. Finally, we'll leave time for questions and feedback toward the end of our time together. So this is Allison and I in DC at last week's All-In Campus Democracy Challenge Awards, where Allison received a well-deserved Standout Faculty Award for her incredible work in student voter engagement. And that's me, her #1 fan. My name is Emily Giffin, and I'm the Campus Partnerships Manager at Democracy Works. Democracy Works is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to improving civic participation by simplifying and modernizing the voting process for voters and election administrators. You may know us best for our flagship product, TurboVote, which assists users with voter registration, the vote by mail process, and text/email reminders about upcoming elections at the local, state, and national level. So in my role, I primarily support TurboVote campus partners across the country, represent Democracy Works in the broader higher ed civic engagement space, and in 2018, I led the creation of Votes and Ballots. So Allison.
Hey, everybody. First, thank you, Emily, for the nice introduction. As Marisol said, I'm an assistant professor of political science, but before I earned my PhD, I actually spent 3 years as a political organizer focused on working with college students. So I come to this from the perspective of kind of the idea that if we don't teach our students to organize, they're just going to be organized. And so I think that elections work creates an incredible pedagogical opportunity that we should all be thinking about how to take advantage of. So I sort of on my campus have been able to embed voter mobilization work into a 3 credit hour course that counts towards the political science degree. And it's essentially a grassroots organizing practicum class that students have the option of taking. And then I've also worked with classes in journalism and in the art and design department in order to figure out how their classes can also take advantage of what a voter mobilization drive sort of offers on a college campus in terms of pedagogical opportunities. And so that's really where I come in on Votes and Ballots, is sort of seeing it and thinking, what an amazing opportunity it provides for sort of some pedagogical opportunities for students. So Emily and I first met at the Students Learn, Students Vote coalition meetings in November of 2018. For folks who aren't familiar, Students Learn, Students Vote is a nonpartisan coalition of partners that are working to institutionalize student voting on college campuses around the country. And they hold regular calls and conferences to facilitate sharing of best practices, of resources, and also building relationships among people who work in the space. And so that's actually how Emily and I got together. I saw her present on this project. I went to the mic and asked some questions about how faculty could think about using the project. And a year later, we're presenting to you all on new evolutions of the project. So if you're not familiar with the Students Learn, Students Vote space, we definitely encourage getting involved in it. It's a really great opportunity. All right, and with that, what we'd like to do is, having introduced ourselves, get a little bit of introductions from all of you that are on the call. So we've got 2 questions on a quick poll. First, we'd just like to know who's in the metaphorical room. So students, student affairs, community partner, faculty, or other. And then how familiar are you with civic engagement planning, right? So is this something that you have regularly done with students or on your campus? You've done some action planning, but not a lot. You do action planning on your own, but not really with students or focused on democratic engagement. Or this isn't really something that you've done before, but you're here and ready to find out what it's all about. We'll just give a little bit of time so we can get some answers into the box. Okay. All right, we've got some pretty even splits. Hello to our students on the call. And I'm actually really excited that we've got about 75% that haven't really done sort of democratic engagement action planning or done it with students, or haven't done action planning at all. So hopefully this will help demystify some of what that is.
Wonderful.
All right, I'll pass it back to Emily.
Great. So now that we have that knowledge, and thank you all for sharing, I do want to ground us all in a shared definition. So here is the definition of an action plan according to the Strengthening American Democracy Guide, which I'll share more about in just a moment. An action plan is a roadmap that documents specific strategies for starting new programs and initiatives or improving existing ones. It takes goals and breaks them down into steps so that desired results can be achieved. And to skip ahead a bit, of course, action planning is the process used to develop and document the action plan. So the Strengthening American Democracy Guide that I just mentioned was originally developed in 2017 by colleagues and democratic engagement experts in the Students Learn, Students Vote coalition. It serves as the template from which Votes and Ballots was created, so we could develop an accessible activity that would empower campus teams to create comprehensive, intentional, and pervasive action plans for this work. The guide was improved and expanded upon in 2019, which I had the privilege of being a part of. And what I was most excited about coming out of that revision process was a formalization of the action plan rubric, which you can see there, which helps campuses self-assess their plans, which is obviously very important. So you can access that resource there, and I believe we'll share the link through chat as well.
Yep.
Thanks, Allison. Okay, so I won't read through each of these key terms, but I wanted to share them in order to set expectations about, as I like to say, the piece of the civic engagement pie that Votes and Ballots touches. As this room likely well knows, there are many aspects of civic engagement and many ways to foster students' involvement and commitment to their surrounding community and its members. But Votes and Ballots focuses mostly upon civic learning and democratic engagement activities and the role of student voter participation in that broader process. And while conducting effective voter registration, education, and turnout-related activities is important, it's also important to work toward the institutionalization and sustainability of that work on one's campus. So I think these are the terms that will come up throughout Votes and Ballots, as you'll see.
Okay, great. So in the process of working with my students in a credit-bearing class where they're sort of planning and doing this work, I've come to see action planning is absolutely critical to the pedagogical process of doing this. So there's a number of reasons why I think it's really important to engage students in action planning. First one is simply that it enhances their knowledge of the campaign. In my experience, for a lot of students, they're unaware of sort of the broader picture of the university and all of the pieces that a civic engagement program focused on voting needs to touch, right? So thinking about faculty, about IT, right, and the interface that students interact with, how it can be embedded in curriculum. Those aren't things students have to necessarily think about unless you sort of push them to see the university more holistically. They also tend not to have knowledge about all the different tactics that campaigns engage in. And it's one of my favorite comments that I get on reflections at the end of the class from students where they say, there's so much more to campaigning than I see on TV, right? That what it actually takes is so much more than what they know. And once they've got that knowledge over the pieces of the campaign and how they can work together, I find that it really helps them to take ownership of the campaign, right? So if students have a real sense of the overarching arc of what you're attempting to accomplish, it helps them bring their own ideas and add their knowledge of campus to the project in ways that, frankly, as a faculty member in particular, I don't see, right? So my students have done some incredible things in terms of mapping our tabling at dining halls specifically to the nights that they know have the most popular menus. Those are not things I am aware of. Getting the bouncers and the bartenders at one of the most popular off-campus bars to wear our campaign t-shirts the weekend before election day, and in order to sort of promote the election to the broader campus community. Those are not ideas I'm gonna have. I'm never gonna have ownership over that part of the campaign in the way that students can. And then finally, it enhances their ability to assess their own work. When students know why they're taking certain actions, they own the decision-making process, their willingness to critique what has worked and what hasn't seems to go up. So the picture that you have on the right there is actually a session that we ran in the class where something had not gone well. Our absentee ballot party wasn't sufficiently prepped. They worked through, what did we miss? How did we respond in the moment? How do we take this and replan our strategy for election day, which was happening 2 weeks later, right? And so with sort of the knowledge of the overarching strategy, ownership over the process, it really enhanced their ability to assess the plan as we went step by step. And that bottom picture is my students celebrating hitting their goals for National Voter Registration Day in 2018. One of the goals in the action plan was getting positive coverage from the town's newspaper, not our campus paper, but the community paper. And that's they got a front page story about their National Voter Registration Day work.
Love it. Thank you, Allison. Great. Okay, so now that we've talked about action planning in general, what it is and why it's important, we're going to talk about votes and ballots. So I will talk about the original version of the game and then eventually hand it over to Allison. So, as I've mentioned, Votes and Ballots was developed in 2018 after our colleagues in the space expressed a desire to turn what was once just a conference session exercise into an advanced action plan development tool that could be used by campuses across the country. So special thanks goes to the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition for their support of the project in 2018. As well as the Maryland Institute College of Arts Center for Social Design for lending their expertise. Shout out to McKenna and Maddie, the social and graphic designers behind the materials. So, Votes and Ballots is a team-wide strategic activity that takes the guesswork out of on-campus democratic engagement. Campus teams, as you can see on the screen, are tasked with creating a comprehensive plan for democratic engagement while keeping in mind their institution's historical voting rates, their resources, and the unique challenges faced by student voters. Campus teams could be a newly formed group of voting champions on campus or a full-fledged democratic engagement coalition. The representation of diverse perspectives and interests is key. So to this end that you see here, Votes and Ballots has three main components: your action plan template, your tactic cards, and your strategy poster. So I'll be walking us through each of those. First, let's take a look at the action plan template, which, as I've alluded to, was developed from the Strengthening American Democracy Guide. So once you get into the action plan template, you'll first see the executive summary page. So you'll start easy. You'll write your executive summary Mad Lib style, really, in order to provide readers a high-level look at what your action plan covers. It's pretty straightforward. Next, there's the leadership section. Here, you'll write down the individuals, groups, and offices whom you will work with to help you succeed. It's important to include, of course, a variety of partner types, and we have an arrow here to check that once you've written down who those partners are, that you've identified a diverse and inclusive team of voting champions. Next is the commitment section. On this page, teams outline ways in which a dedication to civic learning and democratic engagement is or is not a part of campus life already, through either written statements or what you've experienced on campus. So at this point in the activity, If teams haven't already, they might start pulling out their laptops or their phones and looking up things like their campus mission statement and how that might lend to this work. Then comes the landscape section. Here, teams share a variety of data to help them understand the population they're trying to engage. That includes data about, data about your campus demographics as a whole, as well as your historical voting rates on campus, AKA your institution's data from the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement. So that's the NSLVE acronym you see there. If you're not familiar with NSLVE, folks can skip this section of the template, but we highly encourage those who are using Votes and Ballots to learn about how to join the study. And I believe we're going to share a link about how to do that as well. So definitely let us know if you have any questions about NSLVE. After that, you'll arrive at the goals section where you'll write down short-term and long-term goals to guide your work. And finally, sharing the page with goals, you'll see the reporting and evaluation section, which you'll use to outline how you will share this action plan, which is very important, and how you will measure your success. So those are the majority of the pages within the action plan template. So since we've covered most of that, but what's left is one of the most important parts, the strategy, the planned work to help you reach those goals you just documented. So through the use of tactic cards and a strategy poster, I'll say this section offers what I've seen to be the most engaging and tactile part of the activity. So moving into strategy, here's what the strategy page looks like within the template, and we'll break this down a bit. First, based upon your assessment in the previous pages of the template, your team will discuss and circle the options that best represent your estimated level of resources for democratic engagement work in terms of people, money, and time. This assessment is meant to be an estimation that will guide the next portion of the activity. You could think of it as a time to ask questions like, which of these resources do we have a lot of, and which are we low on? Or what's the most realistic way to craft our strategy with a monetary budget or without, and so on. The most important part is that you set yourself up to lay out a strategy that is actionable and achievable. Your team will then use that resource profile to choose appropriate tactic cards, and we have one featured here. As you can see, tactic cards include symbols that represent the level of resources required to complete the activity on a scale of 1, people, money, or time power, to 3. So teams have nearly 50 tactic cards to choose from, providing players with tons of ideas for conducting this work, which is really valuable if you're new to this work and you want to learn best practices from folks who have been doing this work for a while. Tactic cards are labeled by activity type, either voter registration, voter education, voter turnout, or institutionalized CLDE, or civic learning and democratic engagement. So each of those terms are defined within the strategy section of the template, and it's important to ensure, of course, that your strategy includes a well-balanced mix of these different activity types. Teams also have one of my favorite features, wildcards, which allow them to, of course, write in ideas of their own. This is especially helpful for those tactics that leverage unique aspects of campus life and culture. So you then arrange your selected tactic cards and wildcards on your strategy poster in a way that takes into account your team's eagerness to implement the activity, which is along the top, and the time period in which you want to complete it. And we have a couple different timelines in terms of strategy posters to choose from. So there's what that looks like. In the midst of strategizing, though, facilitators may stop by to deliver one of Votes and Ballots' signature game pieces, a zinger. So when you receive your zinger, your team must set aside a few minutes to determine the best approach for overcoming a familiar challenge or zinger you might encounter when conducting this work on campus. So to kind of recap all of that, with the completion of the action plan template that we went through and your strategy poster with all of your selected cards, you have a solid first draft of your action plan for democratic engagement work. Following the activity, you can present the plans. We've done that at conferences to either that room or other stakeholders. Of course, discuss next steps, and ideally assign someone to turn the activity's output into a formal, typed up action plan, perhaps just in time for 2020. So great, so those are the materials that make up the activity. And I should say, of course, we're gonna share a link where you all can request access to these materials. We have it here at the bottom, and we'll also share it for you after. But on that front, there are additional resources we have for you should you want to host votes and ballots on your own, because luckily it does not require myself or anybody else every time. We have a comprehensive facilitator's guide that walks you through what to print, how to set up the room, how to play video that you can just push play and have the activity explained. And most importantly, folks like myself and Allison are always eager to help whomever we can with action plan development and any questions you may have before or after the activity. And then finally, before I turn it over to Allison, I do just want to put into context where we've used votes and ballots so far. It offers conferences and large summits, a highly interactive option for programming, maybe on the last day of your convening, that provides attendees with a real plan for moving the work forward when they return to campus. You can also, of course, use votes and ballots among your campus team on campus, and eventually submit your final plan to organizations like those I've listed here who celebrate and recognize campuses who, for their achievements in student voter engagement. So that is what I have in terms of the original version of the activity. And now I'll pass it over to Allison.
Okay, great. Thanks, Emily. So like I said, I saw Emily basically make a shortened version of the presentation that she's just made here about a year ago. And my question as a faculty member immediately was, I understand that it's all based on best practices, but how do students know that, right? How can they actually learn more about what those best practices are and how they compare to one another, right? What makes them the best practices? What's the research behind that? And so that's where the Votes and Ballots Curricular Edition comes from. So there are two separate pieces to the Votes and Ballots Curricular Edition, and we're going to go through them each in turn. So I'm going to start by talking about the Votes and Ballots Curricular Edition booklet. We can get that. Here we go. So with this is approximately a 10-page booklet that offers a student-friendly summary of the major academic research from campaigns and elections, political psychology, nonprofit management, that backs up the best practices that are being presented in the rest of the Votes and Ballots materials. So essentially, I wanted to set up the booklet in a way that it did a couple things. And I should say off the bat that my Emily was a co-author, and then our other co-author on this piece was a now alum of my university named Connor Breeze, who actually took this project on as an independent study with me his last semester here. So it had a student vetting, let's say, in terms of the student friendliness of its nature. Essentially, it does the work of providing that student-friendly version of the background research, but then also incorporates research onto concepts that are implicitly present in the action plan and in the tactic cards, but aren't necessarily explicit. So things like your messaging strategy, or how to work with volunteers, right? How to think about a coalition strategy, concepts that aren't necessarily at the forefront of students' minds. So if we go to the next slide, you can see an overview of the research topics that we've included in the booklet. So it's a pretty good range of the issues that campuses that are working on their action plans are going to face, right? And trying to figure out how to make choices. And the key to the booklet is that it allows students to sort of pop in and pop out, because so if we go to the next slide, here's an example. So this is the full entry on messaging. Right? And I just want to highlight a couple things about it. First, you'll see there's a number of different citations in the entry. We do include at the end of the booklet, there's a full bibliography. So any students that want to dig deeper, or if you're thinking about using this, the wheels are turning in terms of a service learning project or a class project, students have easy access to get to the research that we have summarized here. The final line of every entry in the guide is a quick one sentence sort of, here's your major takeaway, right? So that students can get a very quick sort of, okay, this is the take home point. And then finally, under each one, we tell you what tactic cards you should think about this topic in relation to. So for instance, when you're thinking about having a series of articles in the campus newspaper about voting, what's your messaging strategy going to be behind that? What are the concepts that you want to make sure come out? When you're thinking about printing flyers, promoting the upcoming election, thinking about your messaging strategy is going to be really important, right? So we have those set up, and then within the booklet itself, one of the best things it does is help students think about how to balance these different options, right? 50 tactic cards is amazing. If you've never engaged in this work, thinking about how those concepts relate to one another can be really tricky. And this is sort of a quick hit guide that helps students conceptualize, given the resources that I have of time and of money, where should I think about putting those resources? How do I balance that for myself? Right? So we can go to the next slide. I really think that having the booklet along with the overall action planning activity can really enhance its educational value in a number of ways. So as I just mentioned, it's a great way to help students think about how they can most effectively invest the campaign's resources. Second, and I think really important, is it provides students what they need in order to be able to advocate on behalf of their plan, whether that's about seeking new resources, about justifying how they want to spend resources, right? When they're trying to sort of make a pitch for, do we just need to post on social media, or no, do we really need to invest the hours and the money into some larger events, right? Sort of understanding the research behind the effectiveness of both of those is key. Next, it creates a better opportunity for them to reassess and adjust the campaign strategy as needed. They've got that material to sort of fall back on to help assess themselves. And then finally, and for me, one of the most important things is I think it enhances their ability to apply their experiences to future endeavors. It's one thing for students to know how to get their peers out to vote, and it's another for them to have a sense of how they're going to be able to take those same skills and apply them in another place, whether it's another on-campus campaign, whether it's a partisan campaign, or whether it's after sort of they've left our campuses or their commuter students, they're sort of in their neighborhoods. They want to work to improve their kids' PTA. They want to work to promote something within their city or town. Having them sort of more grounded in the research and the background of the work we're asking them to do, I think can be very helpful. Right? So the booklet goes with the overall game, the action planning game. It also goes, there we go. It also goes with another set of materials that we've been working to develop, and this is a Curricular Edition simulation. So as a political science professor, simulations are incredibly popular in political science, and in lots of cases, they ask students to do things that they would never do. And sometimes that makes sense. In international relations classes, right? You ask your students to take on being different nations or to act like they're in the UN. In American politics classes, often they take the form of asking students to, for example, pretend they're running for Congress. If I'm going to run a simulation where my students pretend that they're running a campaign in order to learn about resource management and how campaigns are embedded in institutions, I'd like them to be able to bring their own knowledge of campus and think about what they actually experience on a day-to-day basis as voters. And so this is a curricular simulation of the action planning game, where we've essentially transformed it into a game where students plan and then execute their own voter mobilization strategy to see if they can hit a set goal for voter turnout. So if we go to the next slide, as I said, it's designed for classroom use. We've got a facilitator's guide and student prep materials, right? So you don't have to come up with those yourself. Game materials are print and play. The only thing that you would have to bring to it is one 6-sided die per team. It's got a runtime of about 60 minutes, and that includes a little bit of discussion and reflection after the students have completed their play. And it can play pretty easily in teams ranging from 3 to 6, so it scales well for different classrooms. And I see the learning objectives for the game. I've identified 3 so far, and these, if you adapt the game to specifically fit your campus and your NSLVE data, will lean one way, and if you focus more on just national student voting rates, a little bit more the other. But you can work on students learning the voting rates of students on their campus, including the impact of different demographic factors, how those interact. Explaining the major tactics and strategies employed by campaigns with particular attention to those used to mobilize those on college campuses. And then finally, identify how campaigns, often with limited resources, function in established ecosystems, right? So they're embedded in institutions. So here's the game objective that is laid out to students. As a campaign team, plan and execute a voter mobilization drive targeted to your campus that hits a specified vote goal without going over the campaign's budget of $25 and 50 volunteer hours. And here's how the game is set up. So before students play the game, we would recommend that they read the Votes Ballots Curricular Edition booklet, which is about 10 pages. Look at the NSLVE data, either for their campus specifically, if it's available, or we'll make available with the game sort of the national overview of NSLVE data. And then there'll also be a worksheet to complete about their campus culture. So they come in already with some ideas of what's happening on their campus, what would be places that a campaign could take some action. In phase 1 of the campaign, they're planning their voter registration. So they choose to use their budget, both time and money, to invest in tactics. And then, as we all know, sometimes you can plan a great campaign and events just don't go off like you think they will. And so that's what we use, what we call the roll of chance. So tactics are ranked as having a low, medium, or high effectiveness rate, and that's based on the material that's in the booklet with the backed by the research on best tactics. But then rolling the die helps determine whether your high, medium, or low tactic had high, medium, or low results. Next, students check their zingers. So they'll draw 3 face-down cards, and they're the unexpected events that campaigns inevitably have to juggle for good or for bad. Once they've handled their zingers, they play phase 2, voter mobilization. Same thing as phase 1, invest in tactics, roll the die to determine effectiveness. And then finally, there's a post-game debrief where students are provided a set of reflection questions to talk about first with their team and then with the class as a whole about what happened in their campaign and assessing the choices that they made and why they think things worked or didn't. So I believe next we have some examples of the cards. You'll see these are pretty simple adaptations of the original sets of Votes and Ballots cards. They're just a little bit more specific in terms of the cost to you for how things come out of your budget. Right? You can see that at the bottom of the turnout, the registration, education, and turnout cards. And then on the right-hand side of the turnout card, you can see the little H indicating that a phone bank has high effectiveness rates. We've also made more obvious where the cards fit in terms of the tactics that are being used. So the top of the cards have little notes. Is it an event? Is it phone banking, texting, social media, etc.? One of the other major changes we've made is that along with the registration, education, and turnout cards, campaign teams can also choose to invest in boosters. And these are those more implicit components of the campaign strategy that can really pay off down the line. So things like partnering with students to make sure that you have great design and effectively messaged materials, right? Investing in good voter recruitment and retention strategies. And then you can see an example of the zingers as well. So again, sometimes good, the residence halls decide to include your programming and ask you to help them. Or bad, the student government didn't pass your budget and you lose 20% of the budget that you were anticipating for your campaign. And those are good examples of what the general cards look like. And so collectively, those are the materials that we're referring to as the quote unquote curricular edition. So the booklet, which goes with both the original action plan and then also what goes with the simulation that can be played, again, 60 minutes is sort of a classroom activity. All right. Okay, and those are the sort of main products that we wanted to go over with folks today. We'd love to hear feedback and questions. We did want to mention that we're going to be entering beta testing on the classroom simulation game. All the materials will be ready for testing in the spring semester. And so if it's something that you'd be interested in, we would love to have folks that are interested in testing out the game in their classroom. Let's see.
Great.
So we have one question. Are the resources of Votes and Ballots available for free or is there a fee?
They are free.
Yeah, so as somebody who did the process to get the original Votes and Ballots materials, it's really easy. You go to the website that's listed on the page, which I think Emily is going to put in the chat box. You fill out a Google form, and then a little bit later, you get an email with all of the materials available for download. And that's how the, some version of that is also how the simulation game will work as well.
I just put, the Democracy Works webpage that highlights votes and ballots, excuse me. So I just put that in the chat box. So yes, exactly as Allison described, send you a zip file with the materials. And as Allison mentioned, still testing and continuing development of the Curricular Edition, but ideally when that's ready, it will all be accessible via that link.
Other questions?
I don't think I can, I'm clicking the Q&A, Allison, but nothing's pulling up for me, but if you can see it.
I just had one open. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne. We appreciate it. We just had one comment sort of thanking us for sharing the materials. Yeah, we are really excited about the project and the potential for action planning on campuses. I think one thing I would say with the booklet in particular, if there are other topics that you find cropping up on your campus that you think we didn't cover in the booklet, I would be more than happy to hear those suggestions. If there's sort of a multitude of things we could put in an effort to keep it at a length I thought students would willingly read. We sort of limited the list, but if there are major sort of oversights you think that we've made, topics we should put in, I'd love to hear about it. Someone asked if they want to do a beta test. Who do they contact? They should contact me. My email is at the bottom of the slide. It's allison.rank@oswego.edu. We'll be more than happy to share materials for folks who want a beta test. Right.
Thank you for your kind compliment. Thank you for being here. Another thing I'll mention, just to go back to the uses of these activities. if you are interested in putting together an action plan for 2020, I don't feel like we spend too much time talking about the time of year that we are in. So 2020 will be here before we know it. And we would love for Votes and Ballots to be the catalyst for getting folks around a table and putting thoughts on paper. As Allison went through in her slide about why action planning is important, the accountability piece, the incorporation of diverse perspectives is so key. So again, request those materials. I'll share them with you. If you have any questions about facilitating the activity in a small group, just let me know. Luckily, if it's a small group, your cutting out of cards is more limited than if you're doing it at a statewide summit. I will say that's a lot of cutting and printing, but happy to help with either. And if in that same vein, you're hoping to host a regional or statewide summit for campuses to work together and have a shared format for their action plan, that's something I always love to hear about, and giving you all the tools you need to do that on a larger scale. And then, of course, the Curricular Edition and its classroom use as well.
I have a few questions for both of you. So have you, what has been some of the differences or experiences that you've seen maybe at four-year institutions and two-year institutions? Who's been using this? So yeah, if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's, I've worked with a variety of institution types. Actually, the first time that we debuted this version of Votes and Ballots, that again was more than just a conference session exercise we did in 2016, was actually at the LEAD MN Summit. If you're not familiar with LEAD MN, it's an incredible organization organizing Minnesota's community college students. So that was a really wonderful opportunity to kind of debut the activity, gather feedback. In that case, actually, they hosted a Shark Tank where people presented their plans and were actually working toward dollars toward their action plan, with money to help execute the plans that they came up with at the conference. So that was a really helpful experience. Again, statewide summits tend to include four-year institutions, community colleges, private, public, ideally students, faculty, staff. So diversity in terms of the institution types, but also the participants. And I think the piece of feedback that I found most valuable, and what I heard even in our debut of the activity, was if you're new to this work, the ideas it gives you right off the bat are really valuable. You're looking at those tactic cards, considering ideas you maybe wouldn't have thought of, beyond tried and true tabling, which is a big part of this work, but what other strategies might you pursue that leverage technology, which is a lot of what I focus upon. So I think the presentation of ideas is helpful. And I've heard staff also say it really allows students to take the lead as well. Just because of the accessibility of the activity, they start to think about the landscape, think about the commitment section, and really feel ownership over an understanding of that they might not have had otherwise. So those are just a few things that came to mind. I don't know, Allison, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I work at a four-year institution. I would say that part of my interest in designing the curricular booklet is to try to make this as low labor intense for faculty who want to be involved as popular. I know that I am in a really unique position in being able to get working on this project counted in my course load for teaching. For a lot of faculty, that's not going to be the case. And so essentially having done some of the pre-work on, for instance, what a course syllabus could be, or some basic reading materials that you'd want to assign to students that are getting into this work is part of what I was hoping the booklet could achieve.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from attendees at this point?
I see one in my queue, but I can't look at it.
Someone asked about LEAD MN, and I can put this in so LEAD MN is the organization that Emily mentioned that's organizing community colleges in Minnesota, and I'll put the link to their website in the chat box as well.
doing really incredible work, and also using the framework of Votes and Ballots for action planning around different things other than voting, which has been a really collaborative project, because the framework can be helpful. And if you, it's not this simple, but replace a few words related to voting with other issue areas, they've found success with that as well. So that has been a really exciting kind of unexpected expansion of the activity.
Great. Well, if there's no further questions at this time, I just want to take this opportunity to thank both Allison and Emily for this wonderful presentation, and the attendees for taking the time out of your day to participate. I think this is a great resource, and I was just thinking about wishing this was around when I was teaching my Intro to Civic and Community Engagement class, and could have used this. So thank you so much for it. The webinar will be available on the Campus Compact website within about a week or so. You will also be emailed the PowerPoint as well as the evaluation for the webinar. So please make sure you look out for that and fill that out. Your feedback really helps us as we're moving our planning forward. Again, thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to propose this and present this. It's such a great resource for our network. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.